My great-grandfather was the first man to be electrocuted via electric chair in my county. Because of this and my own morbid curiosity, I decided to look up what happens to you when you're electrocuted in the electric chair. So first things first, they shave your head and one of your legs. These are where they'll place the electrodes. And by shaving, it improves the current. Next, they'll tape your eyes shut. And the reason they tape your eyes shut is because of the heat from the current going through your body, causing your eyes to melt. After that, it's time for your final word. What would you say? Unfortunately, I was never able to find my great-grandfather's final words. Not that that's something that needs to be publicized because he was a murderer, and I get that. But I haven't even found where they buried him. All I have is a picture. And that picture has his name on it, so I'm not going to be sharing it. So now it's go time. Your family's here. Your victim's family's here. And they're all about to witness your death. One of the workers from the prison will turn on the switch to the electric chair, sending 2,000 volts of electricity through your body. And to put that into perspective, some people's heads explode in flames, which is just like wild. After electrocution, the human body can get up to 100 degrees Celsius or 210 degrees Fahrenheit. Usually after the first shock, your heart will stop and you will become unconscious, but some people wake back up. And if they do, they get shocked again. Usually with a little less than 2,000 volts, but it'll depend on each prison's protocol. And something that's really crazy is the last person that was executed in the electric chair was only in 2002, which doesn't seem that long ago for such a crazy thing. But I would say out of all of the corporal punishment type electrocutions, I give it a 7 out of 10. Like, it's obviously pretty crappy, but for most people it's done pretty quick. Unless you start Googling people that survived it. But don't worry if you don't want to Google it, I'm going to make a video. So now I want to ask you, how do you feel about the death penalty? Should we have it, or is it too cruel? Comment below. Let's talk about botched executions. This is the story of John Evans. John Evans was to be put to death on April 22nd, 1983. Everything was set up, John was in the electric chair, and they turned it on. This is when sparks and flames erupted from the electrode on his leg. The electrode then burst from the strap that was holding it and erupted in flames. Smoke and sparks also came from underneath his hood, right next to his left temple. The jolt was stopped and 2 physicians checked to see if he still had a heartbeat, which he did. After this, they reattached the leg electrode and shocked him again, resulting in more smoking and more sparks coming from that electrode, and the horrible smell of burning flesh. Even so, after the second jolt, the doctors came and checked him and he still had a heartbeat. Against the pleas of Evans' lawyer, they shocked him a 3rd time. This 3rd shock did successfully kill him, but his execution in total took over 14 minutes. So now that we know about his execution, what did he do to get there? John Evans had an accomplice named Wayne Ritter who went on his crime spree with him. They both met after receiving parole from an Indiana prison. Evans has admitted to over 30 armed robberies, 9 kidnappings, and 2 extortion schemes, all across 7 different states. On January 5th, 1977, Evans and Ritter killed a pawn shop owner named Edward Nassar, while his 2 young daughters were in the store watching. They fled the scene but were later caught March 7th in Little Rock, Arkansas, and the police did recover a gun at the crime scene with Nassar's body that he was shot by. After being caught, he went to trial and was sentenced to death, and was actually the first man to be executed in Alabama after they reinstated the death penalty. So what do you think? Does the punishment fit the crime? Or was this punishment too harsh? Comment below. Let's talk about botched executions. This is regarding the execution of Frank J. Coppola. Now, the details of his execution at first did not come out. There was a statement released by the Virginia DOC, but we didn't end up learning any of the tragic details until a lawyer that was present came out and spoke. This lawyer said that it took 2 55-second jolts to finally kill Coppola, and there was sizzling in the smell and sound of burning flesh, and the jolts caused Coppola's leg and head to erupt in flames before he was killed. The lawyer said a smoky haze filled the death chamber from floor to ceiling. So now that we know about his botched execution, what did he do to get there? Frank J. Coppola was a former police officer in Portsmouth, Virginia, and he was executed in 1978 for the murder of Muriel Hatchell. So the plan was Coppola and his accomplices were going to rob a wealthy used cars dealer named Peyton Hatchell, Muriel Hatchell's husband. At first, Coppola disguised himself as a priest to try and gain access into their home, but was unsuccessful. Weeks later, a female accomplice posing as a flower delivery girl knocked on the door, to which Muriel Hatchell answered. Muriel did not know that this young woman was holding a gun inside of the bouquet of roses. She flashed her gun, and the accomplice and Frank made entry into Muriel's home, after which Coppola was said to have repeatedly slammed Muriel's head into the floor, asking where the money was. During the attack, Muriel's husband Peyton came home and had to witness his own wife's murder via having her head slammed into the floor over and over again. Then Frank decided to do the same thing to Peyton, but luckily Peyton survived. He did require a 3-week hospital stay afterwards, though, and had to have a permanent steel plate put on his skull due to all of the damage from his head being smashed into the floor over and over again. After killing Muriel and injuring Peyton, the group left the house with $3,000 and 3 rings. Coppola was sentenced to death on September 26th of 1978 and executed on August 10th of 1982. So what do you think? Does the punishment fit the crime, or was the punishment too harsh? Comment below. Let's talk about botched executions. This is the story of Alpha Otis Stevens in his botched execution. So they did the first charge of electricity and it did not kill him. But they could not do the second charge until his body cooled down. His body was so hot to the touch, they had to wait 6 minutes before they could check his vitals. And not only that, they counted while he was in those 6 minutes, he only took 23 breaths, which is very, very, very abnormal. Later on, a person that worked at the prison said that Stevens was just not a good conductor for electricity, which is just a wild thing to say about a person. But now that we know what happened to Stephen in his botched execution, what happened to get him in that place? Stephen was convicted of murder on January 21st, 1975. And his crime that got him there was actually committed after he had escaped from the prison that he was in Houston County, Georgia. He was also accompanied by another man that I don't have the name of. This is when Stevens and his accomplice broke into the house of Charles Asbell, but Charles was not home. His son Roy Asbell was, though. The pair stole some pistols and some other weapons that they proceeded to put in the back of the car that they came in. While all this was happening, Roy Asbell came home and was confronted with the 2 criminals. Stevens said upon meeting Roy Asbell, Roy asked him, "What are you doing in my house?" Which seems totally fair. And at the time that he had asked this question, he'd already noticed that Stevens had a weapon in his hand, so he pulled out his weapon, that way he could protect himself. Roy Asbell was in his Ford Ranchero, and Stevens and his accomplice pulled him out of his car and subsequently started beating him to death. Stephen says later that Asbel spent the whole time begging for his life, offering to give them everything he had if they would just stop hitting him. And there was a big size difference. Now, Asbel was 5'6", so he was, a relatively medium height man, but Stevens was 6'2" and significantly heavier. Also, Asbel had a disability from a tractor accident a few years before this happened. Asbel at the time had several $100s in his car, so he offered all of the money in his wallet to Stevens just to try and get him to stop, which Stevens did take the money, but did not stop. This is when Stevens went into Mr. Asbel's ranchero, found any other extra money that he had in his car, and then proceeded to stick his gun in Asbel's ear and shoot twice, killing him instantly. An autopsy of Asbel later showed that he had suffered from multiple skull fractures and a broken jaw from the beating that had been done by Stevens and his accomplice. Stevens did admit to his crimes and also to another cacophony of crimes, and he did change his mind later, saying that it was his accomplice that killed him, but at that point the damage was already done and he had already been sentenced to death. So what do you think? Does the punishment fit the crime? Does the botched execution fit what he did to poor Mr. Asbel? What do you think? Comment below. Let's talk about botched executions. This is regarding the execution of Stephen McCoy. Stephen McCoy was executed via lethal injection on May 24th, 1989. It is said that McCoy had a very drastic reaction to the lethal injection, including his chest heaving, gasping, trying to get any sort of little breath he could, and his back arching up off the gurney. It was so morbid and gross that one of the witnesses actually ended up fainting and crashing into another one of the witnesses. The Texas Attorney General did come out and say that McCoy seemed to have a stronger reaction and the drugs should have probably been administered in a different dosage. Possibly they administered too much to him or they administered too much too fast, and that's what caused the incredible reaction that he had. So now that we know what happened during McCoy's botched execution, what happened to get him there? So to understand what happened with Stephen McCoy, we need to bring in some new people. So Stephen McCoy had two accomplices, James Emery Pester and another man with the last name LeBlanc. And all three of them came together and went on a terrifying crime spree. The first known unaliving by McCoy was a man by the name of Robert Edward Hauer, whose wife had hired McCoy and his accomplices to him. She promised him $1,000 and a motorcycle after he successfully got rid of her husband. So on October 25th of 1980, the three went to a nightclub and proceeded to slash Howard's tires. And when he came out and was looking at his tires, Pastor came behind him and pew-pewed him in the head, causing him to pass away instantly. Then in November of 1980, the three decided to abduct 27-year-old Diana Trevino Oliver, and they SA'd her and unalived her. And she was unalived via being stabbed. Then on December 31st of 1980, the trio abducted 18-year-old Cynthia Darlene Johnson, and they also proceeded to SA her. After the repeated SA of this young 18-year-old woman, LeBlanc, the third person in this trio, attempted to unalive her via strangulation and was unsuccessful. Then the following morning, Pastor was the one who successfully strangled her until she was dead. Shortly after this, the trio was caught, and Pastor and McCoy were both sentenced to death, and LeBlanc was actually only sentenced to 35 years because he testified for the prosecution against McCoy and Pastor. Both were executed via lethal injection, but of course, as we know, the only one that has been classified as botched is McCoy's execution. So, what do you think? Does the punishment fit the crime? Does what McCoy and Pastor and LeBlanc, what they're going through, make up for the horrible, horrible things they did to that man and to those young women? Comment below. Let's talk about botched execution. This is regarding the September 2nd, 1983 gas chamber execution of Jimmy Lee Gray. So Jimmy was placed in the gas chamber, and after 8 minutes, the workers had to clear out the room. And they had to clean out the room because Gray was gasping for air and screaming, and it was freaking everybody out. Later on, Gray's attorney came out criticizing them for clearing the room while Gray was still alive. And later on, the same attorney was quoted saying, Jimmy Gray died banging his head against a steel pole in the gas chamber while reporters counted his moans. And in case you were wondering, they really did count his moans, and there were 11 of them. And to add insult to injury, later on it came out that the executioner himself was drunk. So now that we know about Gray's botched execution, what did he do to get there? First, we have to discuss what he did to go to jail for the first time. So, for the first time, he unalived his 16-year-old girlfriend at the time, Elda Louise Prince, in Parker, Arizona. And how he unalived her and what exactly happened, I wasn't able to find, but it's important to know he was in prison for this at the time of the next crime when he was out on parole. So for the unaliving of his girlfriend, he was sentenced to 20 years, which he only served 7 of before being released on parole. This is where we get into what he did to be sentenced to death. Trigger warning, it's about children and SA, so if you can't handle that, protect yourself. Health is wealth, you're number one. So, Gray kidnapped, SA'd, and unalived 3-year-old Dorisa Jean Scales in 1976. And this is why he was sentenced to death. Now, he was also the first person in Mississippi to be executed after the death penalty came back to Mississippi. But what do you think? Does the punishment fit the crime? Honestly, for what happened, I've got to say there's not enough punishment in this world to fit the crime. But I want to know what you think. Comment below. What would happen if you survived the electric chair? Well, this happened to a young boy only 16 in 1945, and his name was Willie Francis. Willie Francis was very loved by his family, and I hope his memory keeps on with how much he was loved. But unfortunately, the system did him wrong. This story is very tragic, and I really recommend checking out some of the amazing Black creators on this app. I am going to tag one below named Julian Johnson, who does this case justice. Willie was sentenced to death via electric chair. This electric chair was named Gruesome Gertie. Willie was sentenced to this due to being supposedly the murderer of a pharmacist of the last name Thomas, though it is widely believed that this was false. So Willie's put in the electric chair and electrocuted. Stand-byers say he was saying, take it off, let me breathe," during the botched electrocution. Willie did survive this and was removed from the electric chair. It is believed this portable electric chair was improperly put together by intoxicated staff and prison workers inside of the prison. After the botched execution attempt, an attorney named DeBlanc decided to take Willie's case. This alone was controversial because he was reportedly to have been friends with the pharmacist Thomas, who was Willie's alleged victim. But he did end up fighting for Willie in the Supreme Court, saying that electrocuting him twice would be subjecting him to cruel and unusual punishment, which is prohibited by the Constitution. Unfortunately, though, they did not win this case. On May 9th of 1947, young Willie was executed in the electric chair. Witnesses say prior to his execution, Willie said he was going to meet the Lord in his Sunday pants and his Sunday heart. He was pronounced dead at 12:10 p.m. As I said before, this is a very controversial case. It is a very sad case. This was a young boy, and I really encourage you to do your own research and see what you think